We can kick off. Good afternoon, good morning to those of you joining us from the Western Hemisphere. I'm Charly Gordon. I'm Deputy Director in the Policy Department at the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris. And I am really delighted to welcome you all today to this joint ICC-UPS event that will focus on how to foster SME growth and resilience through e-commerce and digital trade. Underpinning the event today are two reports. One report entitled Supporting SME Growth, Unlocking Opportunities Through E-commerce that was developed jointly by UPS and Nathan Associates. The report is based on over 750 surveys of SMEs in 8 different developing and developed markets and focuses on a variety of topics, including the key challenges that SMEs face during the pandemic and the current barriers they have to contend with to access e-commerce. And the second report is the W20's report on women's empowerment through digital trade, in which the W20 and UPS really emphasize the importance of bolstering women entrepreneurs' economic engagement, particularly through digital trade. Now, of course, this event is taking place at a critical time. We concluded the G20 in Italy. We're now fast approaching the WTO's MC12. So 2 summits that are that have a very keen interest in SMEs and digital trade. So I think it's a particularly timely and opportune moment to have this discussion with really a stellar lineup of speakers today to drive the conversation. And really, who better to kick off the discussions than Giovanni Dioguardi? Giovanni is Senior Expert on Trade and Investment at the G20 G7 Sherpa Office of the Italian Presidency of Council of Ministers on the occasion of the G20 Italian Presidency. He is Senior Advisor for Internationalization and Trade Policy at the Confederation of Italian Industries, and he is member of the International Relations Committee of Business Europe. So Giovanni, very many thanks again for joining us today, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Charlie. I hope you see me and hear me well. So first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to UPS and the International Chamber of Commerce for having organized this roundtable. I'm very happy to participate in my capacity of member of the task force taking care of the Italian G20 presidency. Let me also greet other panelists who will take the floor later. Luisa Boyce from Vice President of UPS, Pinaman from the Adjoaa, and Kathryn Lundquist from the WTO. Last but not least, Ms. Shinta Kamdani, the upcoming B20 chair, that I had the pleasure to meet and to work with over the last year during the B20 Italy 2021. It has been extremely helpful for me to learn about a very comprehensive report issued by the UPS on how small and medium businesses can leverage e-commerce during the COVID-19 pandemic. Because many of the policy recommendations you identified in the paper have been at the core of the G20 process under the Italian presidency. In particular, the 2 ones included in the title of our discussion today, supporting small businesses and unlocking opportunity of e-commerce. I will spend a few comments on that before moving through the G20 achievement and commitments. So the pandemic has intensified the role of ICT in every aspect of human life, and IT services have become increasingly pervasive. One of the few certainties in the current context is that the post-pandemic world will rely even more on digital solution and platform. This is true for our daily life, but also for businesses. New technology open, in fact, a range of opportunity which were previously inaccessible or very difficult to size for micro, small, and medium enterprises. Furthermore, their stronger participation in global market would deliver improvements in productivity, spurring inclusive growth and creating jobs in both developed and developing regions. The benefit of digitalization for trade and of trade for digitalization were already known before the COVID-19, resulting in unprecedented reduction in the cost of engaging international trade and changing both how and what is traded worldwide. Platform engaging in distribution services and their ability to deliver directly to consumer have also helped firms to continue to reach business and consumer markets or to find new ones all over the world. However, the digital gap between smaller and bigger companies remain important and calls for dedicated policy. The G20 Trade and Investment Working Group, since its first meeting held in March 2021, discussed over a checklist of policy measures that country and international organizations can deploy to support MSMEs to become more resilient and to leverage e-commerce from taking advantages of international trade opportunity. The main ones include the following actions. So first, optimizing the regulatory environment. Many countries have adopted different strategies and policies not too often coordinated. As all of you know, at the WTO, a group of over 90 members have formed an informal working group to examine ways that more coherence might be brought to MSME-related issues arising in its various committees and working groups. The second is facilitating technology exchanges and enhancing skills development. MSMEs operating through e-commerce need specific knowledge and skill which go beyond traditional ones. The third is improving access to finance. Inadequate access to finance remains a major obstacle for many aspiring entrepreneurs, in particular in developing countries. As recent studies confirm, many of them from the ICC, the global financing gap from the MSMEs remains enormous. G20 countries have the responsibility to address it. The fourth is promoted partnership and linkages. Government and private support networks are key to fostering an effective entrepreneurial culture. Partnership and linkages between MSMEs and larger companies, as well as foreign investors, are also one of the most effective channels for MSMEs to access international value chain. Having said that, let me point out the main commitment of the G20 over the two issues under discussion today. So first of all, the G20 Minister for Trade gathered in Sorrento on October the 12th appreciated and recognized the positive impact that digitalization had on global trade during the pandemic. At the same time, they noted the persistence of digital divide and the challenges linked to deployment of IT infrastructure, in particular in developing and less developing countries. They also recognized that digital trade should be strengthened in order to sustain economic activity, promote development, and open new opportunities to citizens and businesses. As all of you know, a possible agreement on electronic commerce at WTO level is under negotiation within a joint statement initiative. In this respect, G20 participants in the GSI encouraged and supported the active participation of all WTO members and looked forward to a meaningful progress in the lead-up of the 12th WTO Ministerial Conference. On the other side, concerns have been expressed on rulemaking by some G20 members that are not part of the GSIs. As of the micro, small, and medium enterprises, the G20 Ministerial Statement of Sorrento recognized the critical role that they play in our economy, as well as how our global market can be an important source of growth for them. G20 ministers have also acknowledged the different challenges faced by MSMEs in different countries and highlighted the importance of strengthening their capacity to become more competitive and more integrated into the global economy. To this end, the Italian G20 presidency, in cooperation with UNCTAD, ITC, OECD, World Bank, and WTO, prepared a non-binding MSMEs policy toolkit that is annexed to the both Sorrento Declaration and the Leaders Rome Declaration. The document aims at assisting policymakers not only from G20 countries on how to provide supporting entrepreneurial ecosystem and to help MSMEs in addressing the key emerging challenges, including those associated with the digital transformation. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, many of the topics I've just mentioned require a strengthened, not discriminatory, open, fair, and transparent multilateral trading system. And it cannot exist without the WTO at its core. For that reason, the G20 Ministers for Trade, and in particular, the G20 heads of states and governments in the Rome Declaration committed to working actively and constructively with all members to undertake the necessary reform of the WTO. And most important, they highlighted the need to implement this commitment in practice. The G20 Italy ultimate ambition is to become a springboard for a successful 12th WTO Ministerial Conference taking place in Geneva from the next week, which represents a key moment in revitalizing the multilateral trading system to build back better. I thank all of you for your kind attention, and I wish you a fruitful meeting.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. Thank you for these very insightful introductory remarks, and really for highlighting some of the key outcomes of the G20 presidency on SMEs and trade issues, which I think provide a perfect backdrop for our next item, which is our panel discussion. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome three stellar speakers today to discuss, in essence, how we can act collectively to help unlock new opportunities through e-commerce and really empower SMEs in their quest to access new markets and achieve business growth through trade. Now, as many of you know, and as Giovanni emphasized, SMEs really are the lifeblood of our economies. And as the representative of over 45 million businesses worldwide, ICC is absolutely committed to supporting this very large, very diverse, and very dynamic community. And of course, this community has had to navigate some very choppy waters recently. As we all know, the pandemic has been a very severe test on millions of SMEs throughout the world. And we at ICC have worked tirelessly to raise awareness on the plight of these vital businesses, particularly through our Save Our SMEs campaign, our SOS campaign, that was launched last year at a time when the health crisis was fast becoming an economic crisis. And as we slowly emerge from the crisis, albeit very disparately across regions, we must now do all we can to ensure that SMEs are well equipped and are well positioned to thrive in the post-pandemic global economy. And it's essential that we work together to help businesses seize these new opportunities. And here, e-commerce and digital trade offer a clear and compelling path forward for a more inclusive and sustainable growth, and particularly within the SME community. And while e-commerce was often a lifeline during the pandemic, it now has the potential to unlock and open tremendous new business perspectives for SMEs. And in effect, numerous studies have shown that SMEs that use online platforms are around 5 times more likely to export than those in the traditional economy using traditional channels. And of course, we all know that companies that are connected to the global economy are often more productive, often more innovative, and contribute to the development of more prosperous communities. There's also ample evidence, as we'll see today, that digital trade can help empower women entrepreneurs. And here too, we must act jointly to narrow the global gender divide by promoting digital connectivity and programs that support women-owned and women-led businesses that engage in e-commerce. And it's precisely why, for all of these reasons, that ICC is working hard to promote the digitalization of the global SME community by sharing policy recommendations that are informed by businesses, and also by providing concrete tools and solutions on the ground through our growing network of centers of entrepreneurship. Through our digital standards initiative, we are supporting a globally harmonized, digitized trade environment that can foster greater adoption of technology and facilitate greater inclusiveness for businesses. So the guiding thread here is quite obvious. I think we must address the many barriers that make it hard for business to engage in e-commerce. Because if one thing is clear, if one thing is for sure, it's that SMEs are often disproportionately impacted by these barriers. And that's why, for instance, ICC and its members are so actively engaged with the e-commerce and the MSME joint statement initiatives at the WTO, because we believe that a global agreement regulating e-commerce, including through open and non-discriminatory access to digital markets, will provide significant benefits for SMEs worldwide. And so today, to discuss these really critical issues, I'm thrilled to welcome Maria Luisa Boyce, Vice President, Global Public Affairs at UPS, who will walk us through some of the key learnings and recommendations from the 2 fascinating reports I mentioned earlier. I'm also very happy to welcome Pinaman Owusu, who's founder and CEO of Adjoaa. Adjoaa is a marketplace for premium fashion and lifestyle brands by African designers that's really tackling systemic barriers and building a global platform where creators from underrepresented backgrounds can connect. And of course, Kathryn Lundquist, who I think needs no introduction. Kathryn is, of course, driving the WTO's Informal Working Group on MSMEs, and she'll be highlighting the importance of e-commerce and digital platforms for MSME trade participation, and also highlight some of the work of the MSME Group, including the upcoming Trade for MSMEs platform. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Maria Luisa, who will walk us through some of the recent research conducted by UPS. Maria, over to you.
Charly, thank you so much. And I do want to thank very much Giovanni, Mr. Dioguardi, for your comments. For us, for UPS, it's really an honor to be here, and I'm very excited to be with our panelists. Sometimes we hear the question, why is UPS working with the small businesses? And I think when we start looking at our daily, we move daily 3% of the world's GDP in our network, and we have such an insight of what's going on in countries. For us, as small businesses are very important customers, a very important part of the fabric of the economies of all the countries. And so we partner with Nathan and Associates and decided to do a survey to find out how has COVID impacted small businesses. And if you look at it from a small business, from a domestic perspective, we see how many small businesses represent jobs in each one of the communities. We also understand how much innovation and flexibility is important for small businesses. So in our partnering with Nathan and Associates, we launched the survey. Here, what you see in the image is those countries that are part of the G20. The results, we had 700 small businesses that were interviewed. And we focus our questions on how were they impacted by the pandemic. Did they know about the government resources that were provided to small businesses? How are they using e-commerce? Is it feasible for them to use e-commerce? And are they exporting? Are they taking advantage to connecting with other customers abroad? This was a very interesting dynamic. We actually partner with local associations in each one of the countries and local entities that had that connection to small businesses. We learn in some countries, small businesses do not belong to the usual chambers or associations. And so we needed to really go deep into the community, and we're able to have a diverse set of responses that help us understand what we were facing. Also, very interesting, we had developing and developed countries in our survey, overall the 10 countries that we had. And so we have results for each one of the country. For today, I think we're going to focus on the policy recommendations, but all of you received the link to the study. What we wanted to accomplish with the survey and the recommendations is to be able to provide policy recommendations from the ground, from the practitioners, to be able to the governments to understand what were the needs that we have. And these are the key challenges that came up as being faced by the SMBs in e-commerce. One, of course, many of the small businesses were doing sales in person, and of course that had to change and turn to be digital. Their cash flow was impacted at first because when it first started, it was not expected. All of a sudden, we had a small business, for example, in the US that told us they were doing 70% of their sales in person, and overnight, it fell apart. Their cash flow was down, and so they needed to adapt how to change to this area. And afterwards, when economies started to address and reopen, how do we handle this, the COVID-19? They had to comply with restrictions that was expensive in some cases. The other part, what they found out, the small businesses, is that how to connect with customers online. It was a different strategy of marketing and a different infrastructure on how to connect with their customers. And something that is very interesting is consumers also became very sophisticated how to look for sales online, and they wanted to connect to the story of the business. And so for small businesses, they found this change that was needed. Also, of course, we are a logistics company. Logistics, e-commerce logistics became a big challenge and an understanding of how do they communicate about the speed of the delivery, how do they handle a contactless delivery as a business, All of these questions came up for the small businesses that otherwise they have not faced before. And the continuing of leveraging their branding, their marketing, that was very important for them, but they had to tell a story. And in many businesses we saw, it became a family business where the 17-year-olds were managing the social media of the business to respond and answer in a fast pace. The other area that we saw, and I think this is something that we found very interesting, is when we asked the question about exporting, not many of the small businesses were exporting. And for those that were exporting, it was very interesting opportunity to connect with customers in other countries in a situation that otherwise they would never have thought about it. Items that came up that for me were fascinating as a policy nerd in this case, some small businesses were concerned about intellectual property rights. How do they know that they can protect their intellectual property as they're exporting? How does that work? What are the regulations? The other challenges that they found is how to handle taxes and what were the requirements? Where do I get all the information that I need to export and to import into another country? And then managing international payments. It was very clear for many small businesses in some of the countries that we did the survey that it was a need to move from the informal economy to the formal economy to be able to handle some of these issues. So as we went through all the data and the information, we have 5 things here that we wanted to highlight. Although all the governments had policies to support small businesses, not all small businesses knew about those policies or those access to that information. And it is very frustrating, right? When I talk to my government colleagues, we're doing everything. We're doing outreach, we're doing seminars, but small businesses didn't know how to get there, or sometimes didn't trust the system. Does it work? How do we do? And so we need to improve outreach. And it really takes a community, larger business with government agencies, with civil society to partner. The other part, definitely the simplification of the process of taxes, of customs processes. It became apparent that it was a need, not a luxury for small businesses, because they don't have a whole division of brokers to help them. They have to understand how to move this process, and that became very apparent. The other part is the trade finance and the credit for small businesses. Just a small example, for example, in the US, when the US started giving loans for small businesses, in the first wave, less than 20% of small businesses actually had access to the loans. And that was because they were going in the traditional large banks. They did not connect with the small businesses. In the second wave, when they started using community banks and more smaller financial institutions, that's where small businesses were able to get more access to credit. So there's something in there about the connection of how do we connect with the small businesses. The fourth one, and I am originally from Colombia. In Latin America, we see it a lot in there. There's no trust for you putting your credit card online. And how do we build that trust with consumers and small businesses to receive that transaction financially? That is also part of being from the formal to the informal economy. And then the access to the internet. I think the other part that we found as we were doing the study, we cannot take for granted that everybody has access to the internet or affordable access to the internet or data management. That was the other part that we found out, that it needed to be reliable. If you're going to do business online, you have to have that reliability. We also found we had some questions about women SMB owners. These were some of the results that we found from the countries where you find, for example, in Canada, women SMB owners more likely are the sole proprietors of small businesses. In India, for example, women more likely to sell online than men. And men, though, however, in India were more likely to export. The innovation and youth that comes from women entrepreneurs in Indonesia are the ones that are launching more stores online. And so you can go in here and see some of the some of the parts. In Italy, for example, I know Giovanni is listening. We in the survey that we did, women are less likely to export than their male counterparts, and they needed to have that training or that access to be able to do it. And so there's different things that we found in here that gave us the sense of how do we involve and how do we expand also for those MSMEs, for the small businesses, the women-owned businesses. And so as Charly had mentioned from a UPS, we have done we did the policy work with the W20 when it was hosted in Saudi Arabia. We provided COVID recommendations on how do we help women entrepreneurs to be able to connect online. We also have a partnership with ITC She Trades as part of our Women Exporter program. And I wanted to share with you our highlights from 2020, 2021. When the pandemic started, we had all our training ready, everything was planned, and all of a sudden we had to pivot. And so we had our presence in 4 countries. We were in Vietnam, India, Mexico, and Nigeria. And we were able to change online, be able to have our trainings and the information on the phone, which is very important. What I found fascinating on our training is once we provided 2 types of training in partnership with ITC, access to finance and digital trade. And once there was the training on access to finance, women were able to access more cash flow, more loans that allowed them to be successful once they had a better understanding of that process. We also saw women create new jobs, women-owned businesses in these countries in the middle of the pandemic. Isn't that amazing as you are going through this process? So here are some of the numbers. I'm going to stop there because I think I'm past my minutes, but Charly, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Maria Luisa, for these really important insights from what I think is a really incredibly rich report. And I think perhaps we'll want to further discuss some of the key recommendations that you mentioned. But perhaps before we do, I can turn to Pinaman next, who's of course an entrepreneur who's running an e-commerce platform that facilitates digital trade. So maybe Pinaman, you can tell us a bit more about Adjoaa, and then maybe how these reports resonate based on your experience as an entrepreneur working with SMEs.
Thank you, Charly. Thank you, Maria Luisa. Adjoaa is an online marketplace. So we're connecting small SME designers across the continent. Currently, we're working across 12 African countries with over 30 to 40 brands on board. And we are enabling them to access market beyond their domestic market. So intra-African trade and also internationally into some of the global market. A lot of the challenges, to be honest, as a marketplace, Africa has its own unique challenges. It's very fragmented. Even though we have a young population with over 50% internet penetration, which means that we're super connected, the adoption of e-commerce is still very nascent across most of the African countries. I think there is a report that says there are fewer than 300 e-commerce startups across the continent, which has a population close to 1 billion, and also one of the youngest population as well. So there is a real opportunity for us in this space. But what Adjoaa is doing is trying to address a lot of the pain points around access to technology by creating a marketplace, but also resolving the logistic issues, working out how we work with partners, key stakeholders to offer good logistic rates to the SMBs that we work with, and also addressing issues around payment solutions that we don't have a lot of options currently across the continent. You're all very market focused. So how do you enable cross-border trade? E-payments are very essential to that. And some of the other challenges that brands have in terms of the startup capital to set up their own unique platforms. So part of what we're doing is that by providing them access to our online marketplace, they don't need to come up with that setup cost. And doing a lot of the marketing, the branding issues where a lot of SMEs lack knowledge around, and by also working with a few of them and supporting them around the things that they need to do to be prepared for international market or intra-Africa trade. So that's essentially what we're all about. A lot of the conversations from the report really resonate because we were in the middle of setting up the startup, so we had to do things remotely. And some of the challenges were around internet connectivity, which is very essential when you're operating an e-commerce platform. Poor internet connectivity really hampers your ability to be productive. So that was one of the key issues. But in terms of our SMBs that we engaged with, similar to what the reports were discussing, it was cash flow, because suddenly they were operating offline or through social commerce, and everything has come to a standstill. So they had to pivot quite quickly and be agile and come up with new business models. So that impacted a lot of their cash flow at the beginning, but a lot of them adapted, and we're providing new products for markets. So some started producing PPE for governments, or masks to meet consumer changing needs, or moving into the home space to provide pieces for home to be able to generate new revenue. So there was a lot of pivoting and adapting quite quickly. Some of the other challenges that we faced, quite unique. It's not unique to us. It was the same thing that was echoed in the report, was supply chain disruptions, getting materials to be shipped in. Suddenly, the timelines are quite protracted, and delivery. So it meant that, customer service was really crucial for a lot of the SMBs in terms of liaising and feeding information to their customers, which was something that they wouldn't have done on a regular basis. The level of resourcing that was required to feed back to their customers that they were trying to attract, to keep them in the loop as to when they'll get their delivery, with all the restrictions and lockdowns. I think those are some of the main challenges that we faced, which has been kind of highlighted through the reports. But with that challenge also comes the opportunity component. A lot of this has sort of forced and accelerated e-commerce as a priority area. And I'm quite happy, as a previous policy analyst who's transitioned into entrepreneurship, I'm super excited because that puts digital economy or digital strategy at the forefront for a lot of governments, and to see the value that e-commerce really provides. I think a McKinsey report was projecting that about 75 billion in e-commerce sales by 2025 for the continent. And for me, it's the opportunity for job creation, which Maria Louise alluded to, that even through COVID, women entrepreneurs were creating jobs, and Africa has, I think, I don't have the statistics to back this, but I think we have a lot of women entrepreneurs. And I think even in Ghana, informal sector SMEs, we have the most women entrepreneurs on the continent, if not in the world. So there is a lot on, but there is also opportunity to move. But we have huge infrastructural challenges around digitalization, internet connectivity, and I feel that also provides opportunities similar to the recommendations for government to make investments in this space, to ensure that we can leverage the opportunities, we can expand, SMBs can expand into other markets, whether regionally in the continent or globally, through other new markets, and increase their production, but also attract new customers. So I think a lot of the key findings are very well confirmatory of our experience with our SMB and our engagements with them on a day-to-day basis. One of the major issue, which Giovanni and Marie-Louise both mentioned, is access to capital. Setup cost. A lot of these startups had to, SMBs had to develop platforms, and that meant that they needed capital that they hadn't budgeted for or planned for. And creditworthiness for SMBs is very difficult. A lot of them are sole traders, similar to what was mentioned in the report. So it's very difficult for them to get capital from traditional banks. So this is where I feel there is opportunity for governments to look at new business model in terms of financing SMBs, and making sure that SMEs have, can get grants, can get loans, can get different range of capital to support their production, and also having very coordinated digital strategies that really links in, because a lot of things are being done in silos. Trade agreements are being negotiated without looking at what the broader strategic focus for the country's SME or e-commerce strategy is. And I think this is something that I'm excited about, the findings and that being kind of put forward to G20, and hopefully it's filtering down through policy conversations and strategies that are going to be adopted, especially making sure that they're not just unilateral, but a lot of the trade agreements really set up well to support SMBs around logistics, around customs. Personally, when I've been dealing with customs, I've realized that a lot of the custom and policies and taxes are so outdated and requires reforms to kind of come to speed with where things are moving. We're in a very digital world, and some policies are suited to, way back 20, 40 years ago. So there is real opportunity for governments to really look at their reforms, to reform tax policies, and also ensure that SMBs are well equipped to take advantage of the opportunities within e-commerce. So yeah, I think that will be it for me.
Thanks so much, Pinaman, for sharing your experience. I think is particularly interesting since it's informed both from your past in policy and your current experience as an entrepreneur. And congratulations again on the launch of Adjoaa. So I think it was particularly interesting to hear about some of the challenges and opportunities you're seeing on the ground. And I think that will certainly help us better understand what more needs to be done from a policy perspective. So thank you very much for the intervention. Before asking follow-up questions and opening up for questions, I'd like now to turn to Kathryn, who can give us a sense from the WTO's perspective of the importance of e-commerce and digital platforms for MSME trade participation, and also present some of the important work of the WTO's MSME group. Over to you, Kathryn.
Thanks, Charlie, and thanks everyone for being here. And I have a short presentation. Well, hopefully I can keep it short to share with you all. I think in a certain way, I'm going to be repeating what's already been said on a number of levels, because it just keeps coming up. The same barriers: access to ICT infrastructure, knowledge, human capital. That's all been mentioned by the G20. By Maria Luisa for UPS, also by Pinaman, and then payment systems, access to finance is our ongoing, and they are recognized by the MSME Informal Working Group as well. Just to quickly start off with why we care about e-commerce, it's already been stated. Here are some more figures. It really took off during the pandemic, and it's just expected to keep on growing. I think maybe in 2021, some figures have leveled off slightly, but on the other hand, I think this was a trend that was already in the works, and we can see that it's here to stay, and it's time to move into the world of e-commerce. Consumers are ready to be there. They've been there before the pandemic, and now even more so afterwards. E-commerce marketplaces. So that's especially interesting to have Pinaman and have somebody in the thick of operating an e-commerce marketplace. These certain ones, such as Jumia and Mercado Libre, saw the number of articles sold on their platforms double during the pandemic, and it's just an indicator of how important these types of platforms are, especially for MSMEs, which, as I would highlight again, just as Pinaman said, one of the benefits of these platforms is that they provide a number of services that MSMEs themselves have trouble accessing on their own. But I think I'm preaching to the choir here. So businesses that performed well during the pandemic, we know they either had a website or they participated in an e-commerce platform, or through social media, they had an online presence. But it's important, they needed to have certain other things in place in order to really be able to pivot in this way. So Pinaman highlighted payment systems, but in order to access payment systems, you also have to have a bank account. So it's these basic certain basic levels of know-how and ability need to be in place, and infrastructure as well. I mentioned platforms, make sure that I haven't skipped over something important that I wanted to highlight. Yes, digital know-how, and this hasn't come up as much, but I think it's something to highlight as well. It's important for not only to have, the basic financial knowledge and ability to connect online, but in order to advance to the next level, MSMEs also need to have, nowadays in this economy, in the digital economy, knowledge in things such as data and analytics. They need to be able to access their own information and then review it and understand what it means in terms of their sales. Cybersecurity is another one, and I will highlight this again later in terms of the MSME Informal Working Group, because it's a discussion that's going on there as well. Digital knowledge in general. So, as already highlighted, barriers to e-commerce, these are unchanged. These have been mentioned already. I don't want to go into too much detail here, other than to say that that it's acknowledged, and that the MSME Informal Working Group has touched on some of these topics. I think others could be something that should be brought up within the group. It might be something that could be highlighted to them by the business community as issues that could do well to be addressed on and at an international policy level. So the MSME group itself, looking at who's in attendance here, I think most of you are pretty familiar with the group, but just to go over briefly that it was launched in 2017. We're now preparing for MC12, the ministerial conference, which will happen beginning on November 30th through the 3rd of December. The group will host an informal open-ended session on the 1st of December, and will endorse its ministerial declaration, which is a draft version, and it's available on the WTO docs online. The MSME package that some of you also may be familiar with has a number of recommendations, and this package was issued in December 2020. I wanted to highlight certain annexes from this package because they have a digital component. It's understood by the group just how important this economic avenue is for small businesses. It's really a way to enhance inclusivity and bring more businesses on board. Access to information, over and over again, this is highlighted as an issue. How do you trade? How do you know what the processes are? These have already been mentioned here as well. It can really be a barrier for small businesses trading. I sometimes say myself, I don't know that I could legally export something abroad. It's just very complicated. However, the MSME Informal Working Group is trying to make this more accessible, trade more accessible to businesses of all size. There's support of Global Trade Help Desk. This is a tool by the ITC, UNCTAD, and WTO to provide information on market analysis. And it's in all 6 official UN languages at this point. Additionally, there's support for the implementation of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement from 2017. This can help reduce some of the customs barriers that can appear. This is especially important for small packages that are being shipped abroad, that are being purchased through online marketplaces or through websites overseas. And then the package also contains a collection of trade measures to make it easier for businesses to access information digitally. This is more technically this Annex 5. It's the IDB decision at the WTO. And then finally, there's trade-related finance, which is especially important. Again, it's hard to get your products across borders unless you have the finance, and there's support for the legal entity identifier, which is an identifier for businesses. The MSME group has also been working very hard on the Trade for MSMEs online platform. This is a platform for MSMEs and for policymakers and researchers. This will include guides for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises on various trade topics, and also guides for policymakers on topics that are important for MSMEs to access trade. This will be launched at MC12. It'll be launched for ministers on the 1st of December and for businesses on the 2nd of December in a hybrid event, and the Zoom link will be issued soon with other publicity about this in case you're interested. And I think I'm running out of time, but just other discussions within the group are related to e-commerce. Cybersecurity is one that that the group is touching on, and I mentioned earlier, very important in order for trust to be established by MSMEs to interact online, and also the UN Central Model Law on Electronic Transferable Records. It's another one that the group has been considering, and e-commerce and low-value shipments and how to get those across borders. I wanted to touch on one other topic that has been raised to the group. It's not one that's under discussion, but the issue of formal addresses, especially in developing economies. How can you have e-commerce if you don't know where to ship your package to? It's something that they're aware of, and that is very important. Payment systems are also something that has come up as well, and I think it's something that Pinaman touched on. Last but not least, ways to communicate with the group itself. There are annual meetings. We're hoping to have one in early 2022. The date has not been scheduled yet. We've also received regular submissions of inputs, and some of you have actually provided these inputs, and these are appreciated and well received. Workshops to the group, also a good way of getting information to the MSME Informal Working Group. And then there's the triannual newsletter that gets issued, and a WTO webpage on the topic. And with that, I will stop here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation with all of you.
Thanks so much, Kathryn, and very much look forward to the upcoming launch of the Trade for MSMEs platform, which will, I'm sure, provide some critical information and guidance to SMEs looking to conduct that cross-border trade. I think we can now turn to questions. We have about 10 minutes. I have a few myself, of course, but we're also happy to take audience questions. So please feel free to raise your hand or to type your question or comment in the chat, and we'll try to address those. But perhaps I can get the ball rolling with you, Maria Luisa, and sort of further dive into some of the recommendations from the report. So maybe, building on the report and building on the G20 Rome Leaders Declaration, could you expand perhaps on the specific policies by G20 country governments that could really help make a difference for SMEs and perhaps more particularly for women-led SMEs?
Thank you so much, Charly. And I think there's one thing that came across on our survey and listening to all the conversations. There's this, small businesses have a sense of urgency, and I think Pinaman mentioned it. How do they have to react now and do now in their business. For many women, because they were maybe the caregivers, they had to work from home, and that's how they got into e-commerce. Or innovation, they have amazing products. And so I think from policy perspective, when talking to the G20 Communique, which I love the fact that they give such and thank you, Giovanni, for your leadership, the recognition of small businesses, right, as an important part of the economy. It's how do we make those policies to be more real? How do we turn it down into a practical implementation, not just a statement, but a reality? And I think simplification will be one word that I think of. Small businesses don't have time to learn and go through all the different layers. And so the better that we can simplify the regulations and the understanding of how does e-commerce get impacted, or financial payments, or exporting, the best. The customs processes, I know I'm a logistics company, and yes, I am a customs nerd. I am that I am, but it is sometimes so complicated, right? And in some countries, they represent the business or the way of doing business of the 20th century. We're 20 years into the 21st century. We need to update some of those things. We have some good framework with the trade facilitation agreement. the challenge is that we get lost in the policy and those numbers. And so for small businesses, automation, advanced information, something that makes it simpler, it's better. And then the last one, but not least, community. I have learned that I speak from my heart. Since we launched our Women Exporter program, as you were asking about that part, Charly, it takes a community. It is not alone. It really, for example, all the training, the capacity building that we do at no charge, we don't care who you use. Of course, yes, we are the best logistics partner. My boss is listening, so maybe I should say that. No, but it is a community of working together, the government with big corporations, with the NGOs, to bring together and have the training. That's how small businesses are going to move forward. That's how women entrepreneurs, that's how we create an inclusive trade agenda, because everybody feels comfortable that they at least know the language that they have to talk when exporting or when doing e-commerce, and then how can they implement it. So I think those were simplification, the community, and automation. Charly, I think those will be on the policy recommendations that we did.
Thanks so much, Maria Luisa. I think one thing that's quite compelling with these reports is that you provide some really sort of robust evidence to back up these recommendations. And of course, ensuring that the right constituencies are heard and understood is absolutely critical. And so perhaps I can ask you, Pinaman, what are some of your thoughts on ways that small businesses can amplify their voice on policy issues affecting them, and how we can work collectively to ensure that they are heard?
Thank you. So I think that has been touched on a little bit. So I think one of the core ways that small businesses can amplify their voice is obviously joining your local chamber of commerce. If you have one, that's a good way to make the challenges that you're facing known, because they have the opportunity to lobby governments and pass on recommendations and work collectively with government to make sure that those issues that you're facing can be addressed systemically through policy changes. And also business associations, so don't underestimate the power of your small business associations, that if there are one, or if there is one in your area, you can join. And also the same thing is a really good channel to put forward suggestions, or even make submissions on policy issues that are being considered by government in your home country. That is a way to have your voice heard. Another way is attending forums like this, where policy conversations are being had, and asking questions and holding key stakeholders accountable, and making sure that things are being passed on, and there is a call to action for all these conversations that we have all the time. I think, and also as a business, you have a responsibility to keep abreast of what is going on in your industry. So signing up to your industry newsletters and joining groups is a way to know what's going on, what policy changes are coming through, whether from the WTO or the BEF, and passing down to your own local government, and how your business ministers are implementing that. I think that's a way to lobby. And as a former policy analyst, you have a lot of power as a small business. Lobby your MPs, lobby them proactively, and but also give them solutions to be able to escalate and to present to other influential politicians that they work with, so that can be escalated and put on the agenda. I think those will be some of my suggestions to having your voice heard, engaging in forums and amplifying that policy voice.
Thanks so much, Pinaman. We have a question from the audience that's related to the data trends for South Africa in the UPS and Nathan study, which is quite specific. So Maria, if you have any insights on that market more specifically, or perhaps expand to look at some of the trends in perhaps more developing markets, how that contrasts with developed markets in this space.
Definitely. Sama, thank you so much for asking the question. We did not do the SMB survey in South Africa. However, we do have a women exporter program there. We actually partner with USAID and the E-Trade Alliance, and we started doing capacity building. I can tell you in South Africa, I love what Pinaman was mentioning in Nigeria and other areas. We see a lot of cash transactions. And there's a need to provide more training and be able to encourage people to move from the formal to the informal economy. I'll be more than happy to touch base with you afterwards on the side, Sama, so I can share with you more of the information that we have. There's need on the Women Exporter Program for training, understanding how to export the e-commerce area and identifying the key markets and understanding the customers that you have on those markets. One word, 2 words, reverse logistics. That's a challenge for some of our women entrepreneurs. I think Pinaman and I were talking about that with Kathryn. If you sell to a market where the customer is used to returning if they don't like it, I know that happens, then how do you handle that cost? So those things are things that we saw trainings in South Africa. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Maria. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I want to make sure we have time for Shinta's closing remarks. But before we move on to Shinta's remarks, maybe we can do a quick round for last words of wisdom. So perhaps Pinaman, do you want to start?
Cool. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this and to represent the voice of SMBs. I think for us, the whole conversation it's exciting for us to be in the space where we can contribute to inclusive growth and be able to create real opportunities that can make an impact in terms of job creation and addressing core issues. But we also acknowledge that in order to be able to do that, we do need the systems, the structures in place to allow for SMBs to be able to take the opportunities that exist in the e-commerce space. And so I think one of the core issues and what I'm really excited about is to see what will come out of these conversations and how that would kind of filter down and our ability to work with key stakeholders and partners in the sector to make sure that some of these challenges are alleviated for SMBs going forward. And a call to action, to make sure that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pinaman, for being with us today. Maria Luisa, perhaps?
Actually, my words of wisdom, we can do it. You're not alone. Let's work together. Those are my words of wisdom. We can make it happen. We just have to connect the reality with the policy and that will move forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Kathryn?
Yes, I actually just want to highlight what Pinaman said earlier, which is don't underestimate your power as a small business. In fact, policymakers do want to hear your voice, and it would be fantastic to just reach out and make sure that your issues are known, because otherwise, at least I as an analyst will not know what the problem is and can't look for a solution otherwise.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'll quickly introduce Shinta Vidyaya Kamdani.
And Charly, and you want words of wisdom from Giovanni? I think
Giovanni, sorry.
After he has heard all of this.
No. Thank you, Maria Luisa. No, I'm fine, definitely. I just mentioned a quote from my previous president in Confindustria, who once a time said, I don't know small businessmen, I know sometimes that big businessmen operating a small company. So it's my final word of wisdom to everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you. So Shinta is CEO of Sintesa Group in Indonesia. She's co-chair of the B20 Italy Trade Investment Task Force and chair of the B20 Indonesia. Unfortunately, Shinta is not able to be with us today, but she did share a recording of her remarks. So we can go ahead and press play.
Alex, and unmute yourself so we can listen to the audio. Thank you.
Ministers, Mr. Charly Gordon, Deputy Director of ICC Innovation for All at ICC, Ms. Maria Luisa Boyce, Vice President Global Public Affairs UPS, Ms. Pinaman Owusu, CEO and founder of Adjoaa, representative of WTO, fellow G20 upcoming host, and official representative, distinguished ICC committees, panel of experts, and fellow business association. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Jakarta. The event today was a great opportunity to discuss how G20 leaders can promote an enabling policy environment for SMBs to help them leverage all the opportunities offered by e-commerce, as well as to hear about the specific challenges that SMBs are facing in the G20 countries. The world has changed drastically over the past year and a half, disrupting how we live and work, and enterprises are still facing existential challenges. The pandemic will eventually be behind us, but for small businesses and entrepreneurs to flourish in a new reality, they will need strong government and private sector support to pivot to online models and to expand their activities internationally. Everywhere in the world, both in developing and developed countries, SMBs are hit the hardest by this pandemic, with 9 out of the 10 SMBs are cash-starved, and more than 75% of SMBs experience more than 50% loss of revenue due to weak demand and lack of local mobility. Expansion to e-commerce is one of the best alternatives SMEs have. In order to survive and to offset the market, they lost in traditional off-grid market. Nevertheless, e-commerce can only effectively offer SMBs to pivot and continue to retain and reach new customers if policymakers and the business community can work together to collectively help create a robust e-commerce environment. Bearing in mind the fact that most SMBs deals locally, often in rural areas where infrastructure is scarce or not well endowed, and the fact that SMBs by nature do not have a huge amount of capital nor a great access to finance, the support from policymakers to empower SMBs to embrace digitalization, to start over after the pandemic, and to access the market beyond their localities are a must. Business communities also have the job to voice out the need and to assist SMBs to tap into the digital economy. The B20 Communique clearly calls for including SMBs in the digital economy and fostering their access to trade finance. This is going to be a call that B20 Indonesia is highly likely to repeat next year as the need is still there. MSMEs represent about 90% of businesses, employ more than 50% of the workforce globally, and to continue and contribute up to 40% of national income in emerging economies, including Indonesia. As we emerge from the pandemic, we pledge to left no one behind, especially businesses which are hit the most and need the most assistance. Creating resilience by deepening global value chains will be a key aspect, and this means by helping small businesses thrive online at a time when person-to-person contact is still limited. The G20 should provide MSME with an enabling policy environment, adequate digital infrastructure, as well as dedicated training programs to help them grow. We thank UPS for providing the data on where more support is needed. We call on G20 leaders to implement the policy recommendations suggested today. We also thank Italy leadership on this issue this year, successfully hosting the discussion on trade and investment, for its presidency and its contribution to the G20 process. We look forward to continuing the dialogue at the WTO MC12 this year and to meet again in Indonesia in the B20 2022 to build on these discussions. Thank you very much.
Excellent. I think this is a perfect way to conclude the conversation today. I'd like to really thank the speakers once again and very much look forward to continuing this important discussion with all of you during MC12, of course, and during the G20 in Indonesia. Thank you very much once again, and speak again soon.
Thank you.